There's something important to the film that we're talking about today that is, even though it's a film that is over 100 years old, I think is so important to what's going on right now in film society, which is the eventual lost film case of a lot of films. Since we're starting to move away from physical media and into the streaming world, things that just disappear from streaming disappear, and we may never get them back.
It's an interesting point we should talk about, as well as we're being sandwiched between Brian Eggert doing, not Brian, Eggert of...
Robert Eggers.
Robert Eggers.
Yes.
Robert Eggert's going to do Nosferatu, and then Nicolas Cage's Renfield.
That's true.
So we're kind of sandwiched in between these two movies.
And not to mention also The Voyage of the Demeter, a film that I've been praising. Even though I haven't seen it, I've been really excited about it because it's a film all set on that frickin' boat from the beginning of Dracula. So we got a lot of really unique Dracula takes coming on here. So we're going to talk about today the film Nosferatu, a film that ostensibly shouldn't exist anymore, but thank God it does. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hi, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching, and for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. Yes, we do have a Patreon. Check that out for some great deals, as well as an opportunity to tell us what movies we can review in the future. Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check that out, webpage for critics reviews, as well as ours. And today we're talking about the classic from 1922, almost 100, over 100 years
We
old.
missed our chance last year.
Yeah, we missed it. Nosferatu.
All right. When Wisborg estate agent Hutter is sent to Transylvania to strike a deal with the mysterious Count Orlok and secure him a new home in Germany, he sets a series of events in motion to bring the Count, a creature known as a Nosferatu or vampire, and his villainous plague of death to Wisborg.
So it's very famous that F.W. Murnau wanted to make this movie with dancing around the copyright. And I think the other intention is, I don't think he wanted to do international. I think this movie initially wanted just strictly for a German audience. It has a German named characters. All the story takes place in German. So I didn't think he thought international. I think he wanted to just be for the people within the confines of the country.
Well, and when you make a silent film, I know at the time this was something that was done a little bit too, was you could play with what those intertitles were if you really wanted to make a different version and skirt around it. Because of course he was hired by, was it Prana Films? Yeah, it was a company that was only around for enough years to make this one movie, and then it went bankrupt. And they wanted to skirt Dracula, like we're gonna hire a writer to be inspired by Dracula.
If you just change your name, then you're fine, right?
Yeah, and that's why the characters have different names. It's set in Germany instead of England. But I think we can move around it a lot more frequently.
I didn't think that, what I'm trying to say was, I didn't think they were going to cast a wide net. I think it was just almost like making a movie for your friends.
Yeah. Well, I think that's how it was. Even like we talk about the Italian horror of the '70s. A lot of that was like, we're going to make a sequel to Alien. We're going to make a sequel to
We're not really caring about the international dollar, but if you enjoy it,
And then most of those films eventually made their way and had this great love in America, even though they were rip-offs of sequels of what we actually had. So
if you haven't realized, Christopher Walken's name is Max Schreck in Batman Returns. Of course, that's the name of the guy in this movie called Orlok. So more about this is Nosferatu. I think this is a misconception that Bram Stoker got, that this is Nosferatu is Romanian for vampires.
Yeah, it's like the thing is, there's no real word association for it, but that's commonly seen as the term we use for it in Romanian culture. It's very confusing. I got a little lost trying to figure out where the word actually even came from, but
and there's another interesting movie, The Shadow of the Vampire, with Willem Dafoe playing Max Schreck, who really was a vampire.
If you watched our episode on Gods and Monsters, which was a fictionalized account of the final days of the Frankenstein director, I made a note that it would be a really great double feature with this fictionalized account of Nosferatu. And I do agree that Shadow of the Vampire would work really well with that. In fact, I think it makes a really good double feature with this film as well, because you can watch the movie Nosferatu and then see how the sausage was made. So,
and I don't care. You put John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe in the movie together, it's dynamite. It's gold.
We're definitely going to talk about that movie one day. Don't worry about that.
But back to this movie, and it does a lot of techniques that were very inventive at the time. Speed up camera, use stop motion, sometimes even using still photography, but you do multiple still photography and you just line them up in the film. So it's very inventive, straightforward. It's what was beyond forward thinking of a movie.
Well, and it's funny because the film often gets thrown into that realm of German expressionism because many German films of the time were German expressionism, and this film has a lot of elements of that.
Yeah.
But there's also a certain level of realism to certain elements of the
On
the
location.
environments feel on location. They feel realistic. They feel like you. In fact, a lot of these locations for this film are still standing today. I made a list as I was watching the film because I'm going to Germany next year and I'd like to see a couple things. But the film's locations are still standing. A lot of the character interactions outside of Orlok himself are very realistic kind of portrayals and less of the outlandishness that you would see in silent films. Because a lot of the times they had to emote at a much grander scale because we have a title card coming up in a second. But then you get mixes of that with Count Orlok being a very heightened version of the character. He's very bat-like just on his own.
So this movie was almost destroyed. Game nearly almost lost forever because of the lawsuit of copyright infringement. Bram Stoker's wife famously ran around Germany looking for copies and burning them.
Yeah.
Which he has every right. This is very much a plagiarized film.
Yeah, I think there's a better way to go around it, though. I mean, we have that whole sequence where, where Sting had his music stolen. And used and manipulated for another song, and he makes money off that song now, even though it's not his version. I feel like that's where the best version of this is if you're going to sue someone for plagiarizing your work, make money off of it instead of destroying the work. Right. I feel like because this is a very well-made movie, it's kind of that difficult line you have to walk when you're talking about not ripping people off. But I think there's a better way to go about it than literally just destroying every copy of the film. And thankfully, it was saved by foreign exhibitors. That's the whole thing, is that because they didn't go outside of Germany to get the copies of the film, there were some that survived.
Outside of the country.
Yeah.
Music score is not saved. We don't know what the original music score for this movie is, so there's multiple versions of a musical score. In fact, you can come up with your own musical score for this movie.
Yeah.
Him and I both went to multiple streaming services to watch this movie, and every one was a little bit different on the presentation of this.
So Hans Erdmann is the one who did the music for the 1922 release of the film. He did the premiere film music. And then what happened was, I think there's 20% of his score still remaining that you can find. And so people have tried to use that bit to extrapolate what the other missing 80% was. There's also a number of cases. There was a re-edit done in I think the late 80s or early 90s where they use heavy metal music in the background. I think just last year there was a noted musician that came and went in and made an entire new score just on his interpretation of it.
Score,
there was also I think the most famous score that I've really enjoyed hearing bits of is from the James Bernard, who did a lot of the Hammer horror films in the 50s. He did a version of the score that's really fun if you get a chance. So it's kind of every version of this movie is so drastically different that you're going to get a different score. I've seen movies that have different title cards.
Yeah, even the dialogue of the title cards are much different.
Yeah, there's one on Plex that's streaming right now where they show like rolls of reading book paper, and then they have colored dialogue that pops up. Whereas the version that's on my DVD, I have a really cheapo DVD of it, where they actually changed all the names back to the Dracula characters. So instead of Orlok, it's Dracula. Instead of Hutter, it's Harker. And they actually just changed everyone back to the characters they were in the novel, which is very confusing because I've never seen it like that before.
And the carriage scene where they actually speed up the film, so it looks like it's racing.
Yeah.
It's very inventive. I think we talked about a lot in film history, and that was used multiple times. But then we used comparison to Coppola using the stagecoach in Dracula compared to what he did in Nosferatu.
Yeah.
Even though it's a different speed, but it looks like it's slowing down, almost like it's floating, rather than as a fast racetrack.
Yeah, that's always the interesting thing. And check out our episode on Dracula 92.
Yes, we do.
Because I think that's what's so fascinating about the Coppola version is that he tried to make a film that could have been made in the 30s. He just had a bigger damn budget,
Right.
One of the things,
that's what we like of the movie is that nostalgic aesthetics.
And that also goes back to, if you guys have watched me for any amount of time, you know my love for Dracula Dead and Loving It, the Mel Brooks, Leslie Nielsen film. And what I really love about watching that film is how that film has homage to Nosferatu. At the opening of the film, when Renfield shows up outside of Castle Dracula and he's telling people he's going up to see the Count, and the guy's like, "You must not go." It's the same guy, the same mustache that's hanging down that meets up with Hutter and says, "You cannot go up there." I love that film has so many homages to every single iteration of Dracula. That's probably the reason why that film didn't do as well.
Some new myths were added because of simply the production of Nosferatu, which is simply the vampires rise right out of the coffin. This was a new invention. And now every movie has featured the vampire rising out of the coffin.
Yeah. It's really weird when you go back and see how many just like how the franchise, or like not the franchise, but the myth of the vampire has changed over time because of just pop culture. More of it's almost been created by the things inspired by Dracula than by Dracula the novel itself. And that's true of even the finale of the film, the Death by Sunlight, was never done before that. No. And in fact, it was confusing because when the film initially aired, there was a number of outdoor scenes that looked like they were during the day.
It's supposed to be at night, but they didn't have the technique to shoot at night. They just tell you at night.
Yeah, and so that's actually where some of the other cuts of the film where they tint the black and white in different ways actually kind of helps because like it gives you that idea that it looks like it's nighttime then. So in some ways, those alternate versions and the public domainness of the film has made for a really interesting way of viewing it because every time you watch it, you almost get a different movie.
Of course, the aesthetic that's very famous for this movie is Nosferatu's shadow creeping up the steps. Very famous scene. It's another element of that the vampires actually do cast a shadow.
Yeah.
And of course, that's another one of those interesting lifts that they corporately do. But the shadow had its own being. Yeah. Its own, not so much a mimic of you, but also it was own self-identity as well.
Yeah, but in that way too, even we don't see Orlok going up those stairs. So like it is kind of the shadow does seem to have its own thing, and that sequence isn't actually in the script from what I've read, but it's difficult to punctuate around because screenwriter Henrik Galeen, who also did 2 different versions of the Golem, which are really cool.
Which those predate Nosferatu.
Yeah, those are a couple years before, and I think he wrote one that came out 5 years after, so he did a lot of Golem stuff. But that screenwriter had written out the screenplay, and then 12 pages of the script went missing during production, and so Murnau had to zhuzh an extra couple pages out of the screenplay, and part of that was the finale of the film, and part of it, I think, was that shadow scene. So there's a lot of things that he was very dedicated to getting it like the screenplay until he couldn't.
So it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of F.W. Murnau likes to do is a lot of camera stilling, but the characters move more than just. And then what I'm talking about is obviously it looks like a just basic camera setting, but those interactions you're following the people. So even though it's stationary, you're constantly following the people, and it's always busy. Every scene, even like the beginning scene in the tower, has birds going. So it looks like nothing's going on. There's always something going on in an F.W. Murnau film. And especially check out, if you've seen this movie, see Sunrise as well.
Yeah. What's part of that may be attributed to the cheapness of the production. There was a staggeringly low amount of equipment, low amount of crew that were involved with the film, to the point where there was one camera, and they were told if you break the camera, we're done making the movie. Yeah. And so that might also attribute to why the camera is more stoic, because you just didn't want to touch it.
It's almost like it's right. We talked about it in film class. It's almost like the camera itself is sacred, and I talked about the reason why.
Yeah, but then when you see all those people moving around, it's like that makes sense because you can injure the people, you just can't break the camera.
Also, there's a great distance.
Yeah.
Between the camera, you don't want to get near it.
Yeah.
There's a distance between that. Yes. We also had a big debate because this is actually laid in German expressism genre. But we always talked about the entrance to the castle. Did that drawbridge intentionally be slanted just so we'd have a German expression film? Oh. The stairs were intentionally tilted.
Everybody else is doing it.
And we had a big debate in film class that did he intentionally bring it just to have a weird angle to this point? Or was it always there that he could walk up that little wooden plank up to the castle? And so I was always in the camp they intentionally manufactured that little step so they could have some kind of weird angle to put in the movie. But people are like, no, it was there and we just filmed it. So whatever.
I'm not going to let those other Germans tell me how to make my film. I'll just give them one.
Right. Yeah. There's always that layer of, are they intentionally making a German expressive film, or are you using the tools what you have to know what you're making a movie?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a certain artistry to how calculating Murnau was with his film. So I feel like a lot of things like that had to have been intentional. Whether or not it was intentional for the reasons you believe,
right,
that's up in the air. But there's a certain amount of intentionality to everything. I found it very funny that he used a metronome to control the pacing of the language and the pacing of the performances. But that's also, I guess, an important thing because other people used metronomes around that time too, because it had to do with how you cranked the camera in a lot of ways too. If you cranked it too fast, cranked it too slow, you will end up with a different shot, and it's not something you can manipulate the same way as you could today. So.
Yeah. There's a lot of great other people that have talked about this movie. I checked out Interesting Facts by Mental Floss. They have a great 15 things you didn't know about Nosferatu, as well as some other avenues here on YouTube that got some interesting history about Nosferatu. But if you have anything else to add, we can get to it.
Before we get to the review, I want to make a note. Yeah, you mentioned the upcoming remake that we have that is Bill
Robert
Skarsgård.
Egger, not our friend Brian Egger. Robert Egger.
Yeah. So Robert Eggers' new film, and I love all of his other movies, so I feel like I'm going to love this too, with Bill Skarsgård in the lead role, which I'm very excited for. The only person outside of Doug Jones that makes me excited for Nosferatu would be Bill Skarsgård playing the character. And that really excites me, but we also had a Werner Herzog remake in 1979 where he was Klaus Kinski. And then we've had just other versions of it.
I forgot about that one.
I think but when the new Nosferatu comes out, we're probably going to do that other film as well, because I think it'll be fun to see the differences. But I wanted to make a point about the lost films that we've seen. There was a really interesting article I found from David Pierce, who's an archivist for the Library of Congress, who said that 75% of original silent films have been lost.
Yes.
Of the 25% remaining, 14% of the 10,000 silent films by major studios do exist in their original form.
Okay.
And a further 11% exist in alternate cuts, meaning like for foreign releases. They have the foreign release, but they don't have the current release. Okay. And that if you look at the number of films released from 1927 to 1950, half of those movies are gone.
Just from 27 to 50.
Yeah, just from that time. So if you think about even how many great movies we look back on from that time period, imagine there could be double of the great films that we had out there as well.
And I always share this story because it makes me cry. When Metro Films joined Samuel Goldwyn and Meyer to form MGM, Metro Films, their 10-year history, burned all their movies.
It's insane. And what's crazy to me is how film prints of London After Midnight, it existed for decades before they were finally destroyed. And it's just like how that film was able to exist for a while and now we can't watch it is insane to me.
We almost missed a noir called Cry Danger with Dick Powell, and the only reason we have it is because somebody found in his personal safe a copy that they gave him because he asked for it.
Yeah, so please look through your basements if you had a film fan in your life in the past 100 years, because you may be holding something great. Yeah. That's one of the reasons we still have Nosferatu. I just wanted to make that point before we jumped into our actual review of the film.
Well, it's a good just by the dynamics of them being almost plagiarized, the court and the pursuit of how it's still here, it's saved.
Yeah, it is a undead film, if you will.
Beat the odds. Undead. He had to do it. All right.
All right. Yeah. So up next is our review of Nosferatu.
It's not a fault on the film, and I'm going to go on here in a unpopular opinion. The story of Dracula is boring.
Shut your mouth.
I think the book is very boring. I think the character is very interesting and how everybody's around. But the whole, I want land to go somewhere else. You can find something better.
Is the SpongeBob quote, "You used me for land development."
You're George Hackman. You pay through the nose to get it, right? Superman. Real estate, land. But through those dynamics of what I consider boring story, this is an interesting dynamic because at the core, it is love that you're never going to get, right? That's the whole point, I think, of Dracula.
The gothic romance of that book is so important to that element. It's just funny how so many interpretations have been made of the book that we don't view that as much, and that's why the 90s film is so important to me, is that they really get back to that gothic romance of it. It's kind of missing from this adaptation, I would say.
It's that condemnation that I love somebody so much that I will hurt everybody in the whole world, including myself, to get it back.
Yep.
Yeah.
To even maybe get it back.
Maybe. Yeah.
No, I agree with you that the book itself, I think the book is a great book, but yes, it's definitely a slow book. And when I read the book, I don't immediately think of horror.
It's all journal entries. It's
that's the thing about it. But fun for those of you watching the film watching our episode who've never read Dracula before. There's currently going on right now. It's called, I think, Dracula for a Day, and it's an event where they're actually going through and people are reading Dracula in time with the book because it begins in early May. And so they actually were able to
journal entries that John
start reading the book day by day as it goes through. That's what I've been doing. So I'm like just a couple of pages into the book, but I'm following with it as the time period goes by. It's just a fascinating way to read the book that I think elevates the material a bit. But the movie, something different. Yeah.
Now the movie, I think it's required filmmaking, especially if you're going to be a film study, film historian, film student, filmmaker. You have to see where the origin starts. This is a very forward-thinking movie even though it has an old-timey story to it.
Mm.
And this movie, the story was almost 30 years old when they made the movie.
It was 30 at this time, which is just crazy.
Yeah, 30 or 100 years ago. But the techniques of what they were able to do and show what you're capable of is catapult. Watch this movie. I told my wife, watch this movie from 1922, then see a movie from 1932. There's a monumental difference of what they went through for film history and film techniques.
Yeah, the 1900s, not just for film, but for every piece of tech, were this like snowball effect of it just went faster and faster, and things just got to get bigger and bolder, and all these new technological advances. We wouldn't have had that if people weren't basically taking their dimes and nickels and making films like Nosferatu on the cheap.
This is 11 years before King Kong, which is like, how'd you do that?
Yeah. When you see the time period change in that, it's staggering. And not only that, but I mean, at that point, we got sound, which is maybe the most important change ever to happen to film. Because I think we can survive without color in our film. But sound invention changed the way that we did it. It ruined careers and it made careers.
Right.
But when we have this movie, I think it's it probably is my favorite silent film of all time, just because it's such a recognizable piece of story. It's one that I can watch at any time period. I'm also really big on the Hunchback of Notre Dame with Lon Chaney, but this one really spectacular. Oh, okay. Yeah. And Nosferatu is very simplistic in how its story is unfolded. I mean, we cut out a lot of the meat of the film. We got no Van Helsing here. But
No. You don't even have the Lunatic Asylum Ren film. But
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So it's very a lean story, but also has very straight. It's amazing how it's an old movie, but how fast forward it is about technique of not really show but don't tell.
Yeah.
With the shadows, and he's holding her, and you're like, I'm sure people were just screaming mad when they saw her.
Oh, I'd have gone nuts. Because this movie is creepy if you watch it in the right setting today. It's still creepy because it almost feels like you're not supposed to be watching it, because of the silent film nature of it. You feel like it's not for you anymore. And so watching it with the lights off, and you get a really good print of the film, and you can stream online, you can really breathe into the peculiarity and the creepiness of it.
Because it's not really, for me, it's not really horrific. It's just that stainy creepiness to it.
Yeah.
It's almost like, reaching for the door and pulling it. It's like, it just stays with you.
Yeah. And so even though it is a ripoff of a book that has been adapted hundreds of times, maybe thousands. We've already had it become so ingrained in the pop culture that it's gotten one remake already. It's getting another one. There's even, if you've seen the Tobe Hooper adaptation of Salem's Lot, there's a very obvious Nosferatu in that film where they basically just
that's real
the
estate
vampire. Too. Yeah, it's also real estate. So we've got two main things about vampires. Forget all the rest. It's real estate, and they got the two big teeth that people excuse for mosquitoes.
I like that book.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, and I'm curious to see if the new adaptation of Salem's Lot that's supposedly coming out this year will have the Nosferatu influence, or if they're going to go back to a more traditional vampire. It's William Sadler, so who knows how that could play out. But it's just interesting how Nosferatu stays with the public consciousness. It's a ripoff, and yet it's almost as iconic as the.
Iconic is the good word. It stays. If you put a T-shirt and you didn't have to see the movie, you know who that is.
Yeah. Footage from this movie is shown in SpongeBob, for crying out loud. He's playing with the light switch when they're getting scared on a Halloween episode. It's a great thing. Yeah. But yeah, it's a movie that has stayed with me, and I still love it to this day. I don't love it more than the Dracula from 1931, though.
I always say, if I did a film class, we would be watching this movie.
Fun fact, this was in a film class of mine.
Really?
One that I had in high school. In 10th grade, I forget the teacher's name. I'm sorry. You're probably a wonderful person. But I was more focused on the movies we were watching. There was a class I had in high school, 10th grade, that was called Movies. And it was all horror. And so I was able to watch Evil Dead for the first time in that class.
School?
Yeah, we watched Hunchback of Notre Dame. We watched Nosferatu. I think Final Destination. We watched all these horror films in a high school setting. And it really, really burgeoned my love for the genre.
Yeah. I absolutely like your teacher.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
Hey, if you're my teacher and you're watching this episode, call me. We'll catch up. It'll be fun.
So, have you seen Nosferatu? You obviously should.
At this point, you have opportunity to. There's
Right.
like 8 versions of it on YouTube, for crying out loud. So you have no excuse to have missed the film, especially because there are some cuts that run as low as 80 minutes. You got 80 minutes of time. You can watch
There's like 10 different versions you can watch and have 10 different interpretations.
Yeah, I had a few just this week. So
Right.
yeah, let us know your thoughts on the film down below, and give us your favorite incarnation of Dracula. That can be your favorite actor to have played the role, your favorite film version of the
Right.
story.
This is before Bela Lugosi.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that there was a Dracula before Dracula.
That he's all aristocratic.
Yeah.
Which is a new invention.
He's got that cool little hat, too. I love that hat. Anyway, let us know your favorite incarnation of Dracula. We'd love to hear it down below. Maybe we'll pick one of them for a future episode of the show. Because we've covered some Dracula, but there's so much more Dracula.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for joining us. You can find all my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
Mark of the Vampire. We got to watch that, too.
Yeah,
All right. You can find my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts. And for gosh sakes, stay out of the sun.